model being proposed there, which you said was unusual, and there was some reluctance to go down there. Why would we be reluctant to do that?
Just in the conversations about it, there's some expression that it was an unusual arrangement, that you needed to be very, very clear about it, and some caution that it doesn't become something that is used frequently for these sorts of projects. So the last, as Mr. Patterson advised me, the last time it was used was for the athletics track at Massey University, so 20 years ago.
And I'm assuming, and Steve might confirm over your shoulder, but is that because this is not a council asset, not on council land, but we're effectively taking a similar kind of approach?
Yes. Sorry, when you said over your shoulder, Steve is over my shoulder. So yes. So he might be better to comment, but you're correct as I understand it.
Councillor Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager, Finance. Yes, from my perspective, I guess the council, in terms of borrowing these days, is conscious as well of its borrowing capacity, and we've got a lot of discussion about how much we can actually borrow. So it's not as if there's an open-ended ability to borrow. So that's just one of the other things that we've had in the back of our minds in terms of the way this is funded. But the reason it is being suggested that it be spread in some way across a number of years is that there is an asset being created, although it's not the council's asset, the community would have the ability to use it, and so it would be sensible perhaps to spread that over a period, and that the sum in one particular year, if it was funded all in 1 year as an operating program, would obviously have a blip in our rating requirements.
Thanks, Steve. And my last question was just about the last comment you made about Massey and Central Football being willing to fund the design phase, but then wanting their money back if we change our minds. You said you didn't recommend that. So how does that sit with the we're just noting that they've offered to do that? Will they go ahead and do it? How does that work?
Yes, so they, just to be clear, they'd asked that 1/3 of it be refunded if it didn't go ahead, so $75,000 from the council, and they would in effect write off $75,000 each as well if the project didn't go ahead. I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, I guess. I don't believe they'll go ahead without the design phase, without the underwrite. They might choose to. The ball will be in their court. But the most recent conversations had been about a design and build contract, in which case you're not going to separate designers and for separate investigations. So I don't think they would advance that. But
so by noting it, we're not agreeing to that clawback write-off, or are we agreeing to it? I'm not clear from recommendation 2.
Sorry, we're not. The recommendation didn't intend to imply that you agreed to it. It just intended to note that the offer had been made in the spirit of.
Thanks for clarifying.
Effort from them.
Good. No further questions, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few quick questions from me. It says in the report that we would fund effectively $33,000 per annum for a one-off $330,000 cost. I just want to understand, in terms of budget lines, will we be putting aside $30,000 each year, or are we just lumping it into 1 year? Is it being spread, or is it just one-off?
This proposal is for $33,000 operational costs each year to be paid annually to Massey University, which they would hold for a renewal in 10 years' time. And so when the same model is currently used for the Manawatu Community Athletics Track.
And so when it says in 2023 dollars, so that would scale up per year as inflation scales up.
We'd have to come back to the detail in the MOU. In some cases there's been an inflation adjustment, but also there's some benefit to them in holding the money in their accounts. So we'd need to come back to the MOU.
And just a question: what happens if we can't raise the $1.4 million of capital externally?
Apologies, I just missed the start of that.
Oh, what happens? So in terms of the capital funding, it says there's $1.4 million to be raised externally. What happens if we can't do that?
The project wouldn't proceed.
Okay.
The MOU would detail that there would be no movement to the whatever construction contract until the fundraising was secured, and we would require that to be reported back to you for your approval to proceed. No money will be paid across until that was sorted.
Thank you. And then perhaps just a nitpicky question, but I see in the confirmed minutes of that meeting on the 8th of March, where was a recommendation moved that we consider an artificial turf on council land and report back to this committee. Obviously that's not going to happen, so do we need to rescind that decision, or do we just move on? given we're not going with that option.
My recollection, I'd have to double check, is that we did report back at the time to the full council meeting, and at that time this instruction was issued.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was the first inquiry, really, is just lining this up against the proposal for a second artificial turf at the arena, because that was really a proposition. We won't have money to do two. So can you just remind, is there any information you can remind us on the cost of that project, or the commitments that...
I haven't been directly involved with that project, Councillor, so I couldn't advise. I assume it would be in a similar construction cost as this, although there might be some minor advantages in existing infrastructure on that site over the Massey one in terms of lighting, cabling and the like.
Okay. As far as the budget here, I've got
Sorry, I'll just go to Bryce because he's got some,
Bryce Hosking, Group Manager, Property and Resource Recovery. The artificial turf at arena is included in the master plan program. It's got a placeholder of $5,000 to $7,000, I believe it is, because there's the variation, and why that's a little bit of a range is we're just doing some investigations around the underground infrastructure in terms of reticulation and the likes. So it could be as low as 5, or it could be as high as 7.
million.
No, 5 million.
5 million to 5. Okay, thank you. As a follow-up question, which I'll leave for the long-term plan inquiry, is why is this one, our one, so much compared to what this might be? Can I understand that Massey have got 150 in their set aside, and Central Football 150, but yet am I understanding that they're using that same 300 contribution, just 225 just for the feasibility designs phase?
Yes, if they were to fund the design phase, it will be coming out of those contributions. So the total project cost, including design, is 2.7 million, and they are saying they are willing to put their portion of that up front if they wish to, if we wish to support that.
Is that as a renewal split where we've got the suggested that Massey will take the annual user fees as their contribution towards the renewal? Is that not seen as a shared asset where that user fee would be shared to offset both our future renewal contributions?
In terms of the renewals assumption, Massey have said they're willing to host the turf on their land, but they can't support and contribute 150,000 towards its construction, but they can't contribute towards its renewal as they have with the other recreational assets we've established up there, so the hockey turf and the athletics track. The Central Football will collect the user fees for the user fees contribution of 33% and pay that across annually to Massey, who will act as the bank, if you like, and hold it in much the same way they'll act as the bank for the council's contribution. So they'll accumulate in the order of 66,000 a year from user fees and council fees, and then when it arrives at the time of renewal, they'll need to go out and fundraise the balance that Councillor Bowen was asking about. So the university isn't directly contributing to the replacement costs. The university use will be charged a fee to use the turf, just as the rest of the community would be charged. So the university users will be contributing 34% through their fees, but no contribution from the university over and above that.
It's just from your observations putting this forward, does it seem that Massey are putting in a fair share considering the asset that they'll obtain?
Given that they'd be paying user fees on the turf, then I think they're contributing in the same way that the rest of the community is. It's conversation that you've had during these reports about this turf is that they're providing the land in a small capital contribution. There are some advantages to that location, and there's advantages to arena. We get a cluster of facilities up there that are community related, but in contrast to the past, where the university's been able to make contributions to the renewals of the athletics track and the hockey turf, as you're aware, their financial situation has changed, and they've said we can give you the land and help you run it, but we can't give you over above user fees. We can't help.
Okay, and can I understand that from that report some time ago that Central Football weren't supportive of having theirs based at Arena for us to do a partnership at the Arena?
That's correct. They're focused on a home of football in a manner that they think is best at Massey University, and they were reluctant with Arena Manawatu based on just for awareness, I guess, to refresh you, there was the investment from FIFA in the sand-based turf next door. I think it was $400,000 from memory. There's the was now the Sport Institute fields associated up there. What they, from their perspective, and I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but just for awareness, they think that they can create a home of football up there in a way that might be not as conducive. Arena.
Could I just comment as well, because I have met with them along with the CE. It's a scale thing too, councillor. Arena doesn't have the scale to host a football tournament. It will have one field at best, and where they have Massey has multiple fields, and they would have to abandon the city because we simply don't have the fields to cater for a tournament, which is really driving a bit of their investment as well. And Memorial Park, of course, is another sole football ground, and that is one field. Although it is a good field, it's one field. Arena was definitely off the table for us when we went and spoke with them. So I think we've probably got to get our heads around that. It's not is it Arena? Is it Massey? Because Arena's not in the picture.
And finally, is there a key team that's going to play there to draw in crowds, or is it just regular competition? Is it local competition, regional competition? Can I understand the focus?
It's a little bit of both, councillor. We've made it clear that part of the council justification for investing in this is the training fields and the needs assessment that related back to those. So we've made it clear that there needs to be availability for teams to train there, and not just the university teams, but the club teams from around the city. The home of football concept includes we've asked them to prepare a schedule of what a typical month might look like for the full discussion if it reaches that point. But my understanding is that they anticipate it would be used for regular competition play as a standard field for the city's provision of playing fields, or used for training in the evenings because it would be lit and capable of coping with heavy training use. But it would also be a facility that they would use for development, for tournaments, for a variety of activities. So for probably the full breadth of football rather than one specific team or activity.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I think correct me if I'm wrong, some of Orphe's councillor Michelard isn't here, he would know. National League Central Football Women's team is currently based out of there, and the Central Football Youth Boys and Girls team plays some of their games out of there as well. But somebody can confirm that properly. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. In the on page 65 under the ownership model, it says that Massey University would own the turf. Do we? Is it normal for us to expect to pay maintenance or renewals on things that we don't own?
It is where we've entered into a partnership for a facility to serve the city. So we do so with the Manawatu Athletics Track. I think we pay currently $78,000 a year, which is a combination of maintenance and renewals contributions for the athletics track. We make a small contribution to the hockey turfs maintenance up at Massey University because we entered into those as publicly accessible facilities on someone else's land.
Okay. Yeah. Now, just similar to some of the other questions, but I'm still just a little bit unclear with the decision-making parts of this process, because the March decision was for Chief Executive to consider an artificial turf on council land and report back, and then the April direction was for the CE to continue discussions about potential solution. And now we've kind of arrived at some principles agreed on one option. Have any other options still being investigated or pursued other than the one that's described in this report?
No, this report is in response to that last resolution, and there was a report back to the full council meeting on options for other locations, but no other work other than what was presented in that report is ongoing.
Was there any resolution to stop that, or was that explained? I'd need to go back to that, but I can't recall what the next steps were, but was there direction not to continue exploring the other council land options?
There was no resolution to continue any further work at that time.
Okay, so just continuing on with the discussions, because these principles, it says the table 1 summarizes in principle positions reached through discussions. Oh, sorry, in 3.1 above that, it talks about having this understanding that might be used should council approve the project. At what point would council be deciding whether or not to approve the project? Is that the LTP discussions?
Correct. Yeah, our assumption is you'll decide during the 10-year plan whether you're not prepared to support it. If you're not, we're done. If you are, we'll work on a detailed MOU, which has been used to structure this understanding anyway, so it'll be relatively quick to do. And we'd report that back, and it wouldn't be until you'd signed that MOU off that any progress would be made.
So if we were interested in it being considered at LTP discussions, but not in the form that's described in this paper, what would be the process to? I mean, for example, the capital funding that used to be talked about a third, but the external funding, it appears, is contributing towards central football and Massey's thirds, but not towards council's thirds. And I'm a little bit at a loss to understand why that isn't just split through, external funding split 3 ways between those 3 parties, with the bulk of the capital funding or the funding or operational in this case having to fall with council. Is there any anything that you can explain for us to understand why that's fallen so far short of what had originally been talked about in terms of the third?
The conversations around funding are difficult ones, and yes, the third ideal, I guess, if you want to call it that, had been something supported in the past, but Massey University is not in a position to contribute a third, so that's immediately out of the picture. We have developed a funding model, if you like, to try and work out risks and levels. Central Football have said they're happy to commit 150 directly. I'm not familiar with enough with the council, the decisions at the board level, to know whether that's stretching them or well within their capacity. But they were advised that this is the opportunity to put your best foot forward. So you contribute what you can. The number they came back with was 150. And they in Massey have offered would essentially be leading the fundraising. So I've stressed that to them during the conversations that they need to be comfortable that this is achievable. Massey University's foundation has said that they would support resourcing the fundraising, so that they would have a person assigned to support this. So there would be some dedicated effort in that space from the university, or the University Foundation, sorry, because they're separate entities. But and Central Football have said consistent that they believe they can raise the money involved. I have signalled a bit of risk, I believe, in the report in the risk section under 4, because it is there's less kind of in the bank, so to speak, than some other projects in the past. So I don't believe Central Football or Massey, either of those parties, can come up with what would be a third from their own sources without external fundraising.
So if we decided we also couldn't afford the remainder of what's outlined in this paper, but were interested in going back to a third, would we have to give that direction today, or could we make decisions in the LTP process that might affect these? This says principles agreed in draft. How much are we locked into having to work within these parameters?
I'm slightly reluctant to answer because I think I might be stepping into the 10-year plan territory. But I mean, if the council was of a mind that the only way this project would proceed were if there were more significant contributions from the other parties, that could be signalled to them, and we could ask them to report back, I guess, or require through the chief executive myself to report back on how those went before the conclusion of the 10-year plan. Yeah.
So my question might be to the chief executive then, if we want to make some adjustments to that, do we need to give that direction today, or can that wait till the LTP discussions?
Through the chair, you could wait till I think recommendation 3 is actually suggesting that there's no further funding decisions proposed until, we have to have conversations through the LTP.
Yeah.
So whatever decisions you actually decide through the LTP will actually determine about whether this project proceeds at all. Or, we have had some conversations as well about other sites. But there'll be cost implications of potentially doing this ourselves on our own land as well.
Thank you. So just final question, in receiving this report today, that doesn't in any way imply that we're endorsing the principles that are outlined in this report?
No, that the other parties are quite clear that this is not an undertaking of council to pursue the project. If there were a principle in there that is a major fish hook for council, I guess there would be some benefit in knowing that earlier rather than later. But the 10-year plan is the right forum to progress this game.
Thank you.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora Aaron, ngā mihi moto mahi. Just trying to ground myself here. So in terms of ownership and governance, Massey would be the owners and Central Football would be the lessees. And in this case, we're essentially a external funder with governance representation. Is that
correct? It's a model used for the athletics track and the hockey turf. We have 2 council representatives on a steering group overseeing it to guide policy and raise any issues.
excellent? And so and the purpose of us doing that is to ensure access to these facilities for our public who would like to use them? Yeah,
to ensure that the principles that are outlined in a formal way in the MOU are adhered to, so that no one starts denying access or departing from the agreed kind of approach to managing the facility.
Great. And so we do have governance representation on those other examples that you talked about.
Yes, I believe Councillor Arnott next to you is in the hockey turf, for example. As an officer, I sit on the athletics track, and Councillor Meehan is on the athletics track group as well. Great. So there's precedent for that. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Aaron. So on the Massey auction, would that be a multi-use, multi-code type facility?
It's not proposed to be in the sense of official line markings. I have suggested to the to Central Football that the turf be compliant with other contact sports, so rugby league. That would enable it to be used as a training facility, or in the event of you hosting a major tournament and you need a base for a code that wanted an artificial turf that could be used. But they're not proposing to line mark it for the other codes as is done at Arena Manawa 2. Central Football are adamant that they'll be using it heavily, and it wouldn't be underused, requiring multiple use.
And by extension, adamant that they're not flexible about use.
I haven't pushed that to the nth degree to understand how fixed or not their position is, but to date, it's always been discussed as a football turf.
Thank you. Would that spill over into expectations around priority for some of the adjacent fields as well?
Sorry,
would that at the Massey location, does their proposal spill over into priority for other adjacent fields being towards football as well?
I can't comment on how they might allocate between other codes and football, other than that the turf immediately adjacent is the one that was upgraded specifically for football in the Women's World Cup, and as I look at the image that you see, I can see what looks like football goalposts on that one. And I'm trying to remember last time we were at the athletic track meeting whether the football posts rather than rugby posts on that field. And I believe there were, but I'd have to go back to the university and check all of that.
Thank you. And just on the finance side of things, have we tested the viability of a balanced three-way partnership, 150K each, with 2.1 million external fund rather than 1.4?
We haven't, but in my experience, that would make it a very challenging project to get over the line. And the reason for that is that a lot of grant-making bodies require a minimum contribution or a minimum commitment before they'll even accept an application. And I think of lotteries, for example, 1/3 of the project needs to be in the bank before they'll even accept an application. And the further along that fundraising percentage you are, I'd argue that there's a greater degree of probability the project will be funded. So I think that'd be a very high risk scenario for the project.
Thank you. And you've talked about kind of precedent around co-funding arrangements before. Is it typical precedent where a minority funder in the extreme dictates the location?
I haven't had a scenario like this before that I've been involved with.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Just a quick question because I'm coming back in. Can you just confirm that the 1-point-something million is actually operational, even though it sits within a capital, because it'll be a grant? Because it's not our asset.
Mr. Patterson would be the place to answer that with using the right language and.
Did you hear that, Steve? Actually, they've got our assumption being with interest, the 1 million odd figure. I'm just confirming, is that operational, because that'll be a grant towards their asset rather than a capital sum?
Yes,
and being ours.
yes, Steve Patterson. I would have thought that if the proposal is to be at Massey, then the council's certainly not the owner, so it wouldn't be a capital sum that we're providing. So it wouldn't be a capital program as outlined in recommendation 4. It would be an operating program, and we would be looking to fund it in a way that would have had it spread as suggested in the report, probably.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Thank you, Steve, for your cameo appearance. Right, councillors, we have the 4 recommendations there. I'm happy to move them, seconded by Councillor Hapeta. And the council received the report on discussions with Central Football and Massey University on the proposed artificial football turf to inform the 24-34 long-term plan discussions. That the council note that Central Football and Massey University wish to advance the design phase, willing to fund that stage up to a value of 225,000. The council makes no further funding decisions on the proposed artificial turf ahead of the long-term plan discussions, and that's option 2. And that council note the new capital program 1133 artificial football field, subject to part external funding for 199,000, will be unspent in the 23-24 current year. Look, councillors, I've been involved at the back end of this, and I really want to put this to bed. We either support our football fraternity or we don't, and I'm hearing a bit of mixed messaging around the room. So if I can just give you some recall on it. Look, this is a partnership, right? We can't do this by ourselves. It is a football specific turf, although it could be used for training. And I'll give you an example. The Cyclones or the Hurricanes, if they're here, or the Turbos could possibly use it. The football, if anybody that goes up there, and I do, and I went and saw the Sevens just recently, it is a multi-code facility there at Massey University. So there is rugby, there is definitely football as well. It's a partnership, and we have history with our city partner, Massey University. We have heritage around the athletics, and that's been a very good model for us. And I think the way it was funded, but also the way it is managed, Councillor Meehan's been on that, and previously former Councillor Petrinas was on it, and we managed to get that renewal. We've been through the renewal process with them on the track as well, and it's right up with international standards. The hockey is as well. That was a bit more difficult because the university was starting to feel that the financial crunch when we came down to the nitty-gritty of putting that in. If you can recall, Central Football have come to us, I think this would probably be their 6th time of LTPs, or not 6th time of LTPs, but annual plans, talking to us about their preferred, what they want to do in the city. They represent 600,000 plus people across Taranaki, Hawke's Bay, Manawatu and Wanganui. They have suggested to us that Massey is their preferred site. And there's some reasons. We miss out on, you'll notice those that watch the secondary school tournaments closely, we don't feature on football. And that is a problem. We don't have the field capacity. Massey University does give us the scale to do that. It can't go to arena. So I just want to get that out of councillors' heads. It is not a Massey versus arena thing. It can't happen. If it could, I'd be advocating for arena, but it can't. There's no scale there. The conversation about hybrid turfs and all that is something different at arena. So Memorial Park was the only other option. Scotland Park again is too small as well. And the feasibility study on that all backs that assumption up. I think the good thing around this, it is shared. We're sharing the risk. Massey Foundation and Central Football have been proven to be good fundraisers. The foundation we know about firsthand, and the projects that they've fundraised for the university, but also Central Football and Park Island facility, which they are headquartered out of. So I do think this is something we should be supporting. There is other options, other possible partners that could come into that. New Zealand Defence Force, which I was at yesterday with a facility opening. Somehow we got onto this, and both the base commander and one of their sports officers said this was something that they would be interested in on that side of the river for their personnel. So I do think there is some other options that could be unearthed. The funding split, having personally been involved in a few programs of this scale, you won't get any traction if you start nipping at the heels of how much we're going to put in. I think how we fund this, there is some other options which the officer spoke about, and I would be open to those as it's going to be a community asset that would be used over a period of years. So ask you to support this, and I think if we don't, we tell football as a city we're not interested, but I don't think that is the message we need to send. We should be sending them a message that we are open to football being played in the city at some scale, and we would like to partner, and I underline the word partner, with other city partners to get it across the line. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support these recommendations on the basis that doesn't actually commit us today. Pardon? Oh yeah, I do have to stand up. Thank you. That doesn't commit us today to any particular course of travel. However, I do differ with the Mayor in terms of what I would see my hopes for the way forward. What is outlined in this paper in terms of the principles that have been tentatively agreed if we were to proceed with this is actually a 13% and 74% split, with 74% falling in our laps. This is at a time where our community can't afford it any more than Central Football or Massey. So why would we agree to something as disproportionate to that? So, I mean, I guess in looking at the process, the position that we were in March when we asked officers to further explore council land, the premise of that hasn't changed, and that how we would have to fund this is purely through operational, basically through grants. We would be having to just simply hand over operational cash. I'm disappointed that the Other options are not clear to us at this point. We've sort of gone in the April meeting, we did give direction for the chief executive to go away and have some conversations. I had not assumed that that would mean that no other options would be continued to be explored. And from that perspective, I think we perhaps just need to be a little bit clearer in our direction going in future, that when to say no to this is not telling football that we're not invested. I mean, I don't think we deal with our communication in those sort of ultimatums. There could be options going forward that might represent a better proportion of commitment from the city as compared to the football or Massey. But what is outlined in this paper is certainly far from that, in my view. So those are obviously conversations for next week or another week. But at the moment, as the recommendations are outlined, I'm happy to support that. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First point I just want to raise is that this has been captured in our planning as a capital project incorrectly. This is actually, on this proposal, an operational program, and we should make sure we're clear on that because they have different funding implications for us going forward. The other one is around the arena, and it's not necessarily that Central Football were going to go to arena, but and we know that they don't want to, but we do have in our long-term plan a proposal for a second turf at arena we've got a budget for. And then it comes up to what would be the priority if we only did one, which would win. And a capital investment at the arena would seem a wiser investment for my mind. The second point I just want to compare on that is having a provision of around a $5 million sum when we're looking at a 2.7 million sum is just a red flag for me that somewhere along the line we're not getting our ballpark figures quite right when there's that much difference. So either we're planning for something that's gold plated or they're potentially undercooking what might be required at Massey as a dollar figure, which again is a red flag. One I'd want to have shaped up more accurately with confidence. The other one is around partnership. I think Councillor Naylor just mentioned that split around who's putting skin in the game, and I feel like we are the enabler, but I don't feel like they've got the skin the same way, and yet they're dictating the terms. They dictated the terms last time they presented, and I'm still not comfortable with the arrangement now, because every aspect, even with the ongoing renewals, is that we're the ones that are the disadvantaged on a fair and reasonable way forward. So I think both Massey, and it's interesting with their financial pressures coming, dictating how they might run the operation. And then Central Football, obviously, we want to have wide use for that. But I'm still of a mind that right from the pathway of the early scoping reports around where the preferable sites have been, I feel there's been flaws in each step of the process. Now we get to here, and I'm still not comfortable with it. So to try and undo all of that work is maybe challenging, maybe for my support. Just indicating that, but I feel like these steps are the only way forward to measure it up and fairly against every other pressure in the programs. And I would suggest that Central Football and Massey University hold off in advancing their design phase, because without us being the lion's share of this, supporting it, it'd be a poor investment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I will support it, and the reason why I will support it is because, as the Mayor said, the Central Football have been to us on several occasions and have said to us that they really want to have a partnership arrangement with us. Originally they did say they wanted to go to arena, but that didn't work for them, so they do want to come to Massey. So that's really important to them, and they have scoped out the land there. And it is Massey's land. So Massey are putting up a big contribution in terms of the land at Massey. Now, the model for the athletics track has worked very well with us over the last many years that we've had a partnership with them at Massey. So we can't say that it hasn't worked. The athletic track has worked for the community and it's worked for us. So going forward, we can say that model hasn't worked. It has worked very well for us. So think the Mayor talked about other potential partners that could come on board with Linton. And I think we've got to potentially look at that and look at other funders going forward of what could happen going forward for funders in the future. And we have to open our eyes and say, yep, we're taking a gamble here, but there's a lot of footballers in our community that want to have good access to good football facilities. And this will be a really good one for us, for our community, and that's what we've got to support going forward. So I'm supporting it.
Councillor Sabellin.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to speak to, I think, tease out an issue I think has been conflated a bit, which is the aspiration for a home of football, which is Central Football's aspiration, and what our role is, which is providing adequate facilities for recreation. And the real driver that I had got from our perspective in the times that this has come before the chamber was that we need to be able to extend the training season through better lighting and an artificial turf so that we can provide more training capacity and more game capacity. So I understood that was the driver and that was the need that we were assessing. So I think there is a little bit of conflation between what the need from the community is that we're seeking to address and what the aspirations for a home of football are, because those aspirations are not necessarily coming from us or being driven by us, and there's more to it than just a turf. A home of football as a whole sort of complex, and it has the changing rooms and it has the meeting rooms, club rooms, and it's a whole sort of thing. So I guess when I'm looking at this and hearing that arena's been axed and it's off the table, I wonder whether that's because it doesn't fit our aspirations to provide more training facilities throughout the year, or because it doesn't fit the aspirations for a home of football. And so that's the conflation that I'm interested in. What's our core role and what's their aspiration? And then I think the question that I'm teasing out is, are we here to fulfill our core role in this space, or are we here to act as a partner in getting those the aspirations of a home of football live and running? So that's the point that I'm interested in debating at the long-term plan, and I think this has been really interesting. And thanks to the officer for a really good report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support this because it takes it to the next step, and I think we need to go to the next step. Home of football. We've talked about this before. Arena doesn't fit because in your home you don't get locked out. Okay, at Arena you get locked out. At Massey you don't get locked out. Makes it a home. Also, one pitch, even if we put a second one in Massey, doesn't give it the home of football. Okay, Massey does, and what we know is if we get secondary school sports here, championships and so forth, we know what it does economy wise and with our city. So it's an investment in the right area. It's not about our core values. Yes, our core values are to provide fields and stuff so these games be played, but in providing that, we provide the bigger picture as well. If we support the home of football, we get national sports games here as well, which supports us economically. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And like the previous speaker, do agree that it should go to the further stage, but that's probably the extent of agreement I can offer it at this stage. Because I do have and have had for some time, a level of discomfort with this, and I would question the extent to which we are in a partnership scenario here. To me, partnerships are represented by flexibility, they're represented by reciprocity, and I'm not seeing as much of that here as would be expected. We're being told where it will be, where it won't be, being told that we're going to pay a whole lot more than the other partners. We're being told that it's, home of football and probably not home of much else. To me, these things kind of don't necessarily fit with a wider city aspiration on what we want to develop and provide for our community. And so while I will support it through to the long-term plan, I don't have a comfort level at this point taking it any further.
All right, thanks, councillors. Look, just to write a reply, because there's been a few comments made about we're paying 74%. Just did my math. and $850,000 on $2.7 million facility is not 74%. But no, can I finish first, please? You can do it at the end of when I've finished. So 850,000 isn't 74%. When we are not the fundraiser, and that is the thing. We are not the fundraiser. So Massey Foundation and Central Football are doing the fundraising. The city isn't doing the fundraising. We've been in partnership with Massey for decades, and I cannot recall them saying they wanted to come and do a multi-code. It's always been, and it's, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've come here and said that they wanted a football-specific turf. They didn't want a multi-turf. We've already got one of those, and we're possibly going to get another one at Arena. It just all depends in time and affordability. So I'm just unsure where the mixed messages have got there. For football to invest in some lights and some simple training grounds, yes, there's that element of it, but it's very expensive to do that without having a playing facility on top of that. So to use the terms double whammy, I think we are getting a good bang for buck if we look at a turf that can not only provide training and access to the public, but also a playing facility. So I think if you come back down to the principles, and I do, look, I've always been a supporter of a third, but sometimes sometimes projects do differ and they have to be a little bit bespoke. If we're putting in, and let's say we do put in 850,000 and we walk away and our foundation partner and our from Massey and Central Football raise the rest, is that such a bad deal for the city? When we would have to look at perhaps capital investing the whole entire lot at 5 million, according to other figures from some of the officers, or let's even say it's 3 million. And possibly one of our biggest codes may use it, may not use it, and it would have multiple lines on it. I'm unsure if that would be the best outcome for us. So look, we've got some National League teams that play here too for football. I'm just struggling with why we would be so adverse to continuing having those teams here. Clustering also happens, and Massey University are trying very hard to do that with other codes. So at the newly rebranded Sport Institute there, the Central District's cricket women's team are basing themselves there. This football arrangement helps that. It also helps the basketball connections there and also the ongoing rugby connections. So the home of football, please don't get too hung up on that, because I do think it has wider sporting implications for other codes as well. It's not a shutting out others or not a partnership where we're being told this and that. Certainly, Massey University have been quite open to conversations. The conversations that the CE and myself have had with the Vice Chancellor and senior management have been quite open. And I believe that they are good fundraisers. They can get the rest of the money. I do push back a little bit on saying that we are doing everything. They're providing land. We're sharing the risk around ongoing OPEX. I get the affordability thing. If it's all about affordability, I'm with you on it is a struggle. But is this a bad deal if we did have 850,000 sitting around? Probably wouldn't be. So I'll leave it at that. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just to clarify my comments, in terms of the 74% contribution was as a percentage of the three parties' contribution, which is outlined on page 64, being 850, 150 and 150. So just wanted to clarify that based on the Mayor's comments.
Thank you. Noted. All right, councillors, we will vote. It has passed 13 votes for and 1 against. Okay, we move on to number 12, which is around the Palmerston North Airport, the statement of expectations for 24, 25, 26, 27. Invite our Finance Manager, Steve Patterson, up. Steve, it's on page 73 of your papers.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr Mayor and councillors. As you all know, the airport's an important part of the city's infrastructure, and the council owns the airport company as the mechanism for making this facility what we expect it to be. So in that context, there are legislative arrangements as to how the relationship should work through statements of expectations, statements of intent, etc. We introduced for the first time having a statement of expectations for this company in 2020, and so this is the 4th iteration coming up of that. You also are aware from the discussion a little bit earlier in the meeting that there are ongoing discussions about the way in which the company might be funded for some of the things that they're looking to do and that we're embracing in terms of their future. So it seemed that there were options like not having a statement of expectations in those uncertain environments, but that's not helpful to them. They are required to prepare a statement of intent for us and to do that and deliver it to us before the 1st of March. So from my perspective, it seemed appropriate to try to keep relative consistency with what our expectations, the way our expectations have been expressed to them in the past or in the recent past, and therefore to make minimal changes to the statement of expectations. And so the one that's before you as a draft does that, but it does acknowledge that there are ongoing discussions between the council and them about a number of things, and I guess formally, if they resulted in things which were a significant deviation from the statement of intent that they produce first up for us, then that could lead to the need through the year to consider a revised statement of intent. And so that's the legislation does cope with that prospect, and we have done that once in the past for the airport company when there was something being proposed that would see a need, a material need, a change to change that. So for the moment, though, it's my belief that to keep things reasonably consistent with what they've been in the last year is appropriate. And so, as I said, that's what's being proposed here.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. Just wanted to go to page 79, section 3.2 of the statement of expectation. And at the end of that first paragraph, there's a statement that council has, however, has an expectation that a dividend payment will be progressively reinstated in line with PNAL's dividend policy. Can I just understand what the implications are of the inclusion of in line with PNAL's dividend policy?
Well, we expect the statement of intent to include a dividend policy, and so the present one does. And when they develop their statement of intent, we would expect them to continue to have that A policy, and we'll comment on that as part of the process of considering the statement of intent. And once we you endorse that, then that policy would be the framework for the way in which was considered from there.
Thank you. I can understand why the policy is present, but when we say the words in line with the policy, does that mean that ultimately we are constraining ourselves to accepting their policy as the driver of any decision?
Well, when you say accepting their policy, it is true in the end it would be their policy that's expressed in their statement of intent, but we in the end have strong inability to be able to give feedback about that policy as part of the draft statement of intent process, and it would be in their interest to take notice of of your expectations in relation to that. And so, if I can recall, I mean, I know for a fact for the last year we had discussion about this, and so in the letter back to them on the draft, you'd given your expectation through that meeting as to what you would expect to see reflected in the statement of intent, and the levels of dividend, for example, that were proportionately in percentage terms that they'd expect to have in there, and they've reflected those in the current statement of intent. It does agree with the feedback that we gave them from that meeting at that time. So I'd expect that if once they work through their drafts and do all their projections, and they see what their capabilities are, what financial position they find themselves in, they would then be able to, I suppose, make a proposal to us about what they would see as being appropriate. And you've got the ability then to comment back to them.
Thank you for giving me your view on that sentences. Would you say that P&L's read and view of that sentence is the same as what you've explained here? Like it.
Well, in the end, when it comes to actually making the dividend payment, the directors have some responsibilities in the law as directors of a company around its liquid position and the like. There are various tests that they as directors have to make before they can actually reasonably and prudently make such a call. So it's not absolute that they can make a commitment. But in terms of our expectations as the council, I think we can fairly describe what they would be in proportionate terms.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kia ora, Steve, ngā mihi. You just mentioned that we expect to see a dividend policy in the SOI. It was my understanding that the policy was a new addition driven by the P&AL board after discussions about reinstating a dividend. Could you comment on that?
Traditionally, we always had a dividend policy in the statement of intent, and there always has been some reference to dividend, whether it's that there be none or that it be something. For many years, it was expressed in proportionate terms as being 40% of the after-tax dividend. Then we went through that period where they were about to embark on their development, and the council decided to wind that back, and then COVID came, and that meant as well that was wound back. And so you've had recent discussions in the last year or so about that being reinstated.
So previously we were able to identify a percentage figure, and that sort of encapsulated
yes
the policy, and it's a little bit more complicated.
It is now, yes, but it's, I mean, the present one does have some percentages in here in terms of our expectations.
To my knowledge, the most I've seen of the policy is sort of 4 or 5 bullet points capturing the essence of it. I think in last year's SOE, to my memory. Is there a more substantial policy document existing?
In terms of the dividend policy?
Yes.
Yeah, the dividend policy in full is not super long, but it's on page 21 of their statement of intent that you'll find on their website and our website.
Great, thank you. I just had one more, and it's jumping away from the dividend. On page 79, we talk about expecting P&AL to maintain suitably prudent risk policies. Just wondering, what is our scale for suitably prudent, and is there a framework for assessing that risk, and who decides what is prudent?
I guess as directors, they have to make that call about what they think is prudent, but we would expect to see that they are considering risk as one of the things that they consider.
So a director's call rather than a framework process for managing risk?
We haven't prescribed any particular frameworks for them, but and I don't know whether that's appropriate or not, but certainly we're having to look as the council at what risks we see as we progressively would be looking to raise money on their behalf in particular.
Yes.
And that the more that we do that, the more that we have to be sure that they're capable of servicing and repaying that debt, because we're relying on them being an entity that can prove that it is viable for that debt that we on lend to them, not to be eating into the headroom for the council's own debt.
So we might assess that via our own risk tolerance settings, potentially, if we were assessing our prudence.
We haven't we haven't done it through a formal framework, I'd have to say, up till now, but we as we get to be investing much more heavily, or they get to be investing much more heavily, we need to be thinking about the risks.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Steve.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Steve, your answer to Councillor Zabellin, you mentioned that there are percentages in our expectations that are outlined. Whereabouts are they outlined in this paper?
No, they're not particularly outlined here in this statement of expectations, but last time in the letter that I wrote back to them expressing that your decisions from the draft statement of intent, they then in their statement of intent that is sitting there now, it expresses the expectation that there'll be a 10% indicative dividend of 10% included for the year in 24 payable in 24-25, and then a 20% one in the years following that.
And a what one following that?
20% in the years following that.
So what year was it for the 10%?
The 10% relates to the 23-24 year that we're in at the moment, payable by them in 24-25,
Yep.
and then 20% in the following years.
So 20% in the following years, that's year 1 and 2, and were they just going to leave it at 20% for all 3 years?
At the moment, in terms of the current SOI, it says that, yes.
Okay, so in terms of ensuring that our expectations are really clear, you had said that they might come up with something and then bring it back to us, and then we could change it. Would it make more sense to be a bit more clear at this point with when we're doing the statement of expectations, if we wanted that adjusted in any way?
If you wanted to be more specific than what we currently are, then now's the time to express that.
Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Yeah, Steve, just a very quick question. Say, and I know you won't have the exact answer there at your fingertips, but you've been here long enough. So roughly how many years in the last 20 would you say that the airport has paid this council a dividend?
It would be all except the last 2.
Would it?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Or 3. I think I can't remember if it's the last 2 or 3, but.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Right, we've got a recommendation here, and we've got another one that's coming. But look, I think we can probably pass this one first, and then we can deal with the second one coming as well. So we've got recommendation to council that we adopt the statement of expectations for the Palmerston North Airport 24-25 to 26-27, attachment 1. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Steve, for putting that in front of us. I think the questions around the dividend will get probably a little bit more airtime in the in the second additional recommendation. And I'll let the mover and seconder speak to that separately. But look, I think that we can't underestimate the importance of the airport and the campus there as a gateway to the city and wider region, but also a driver for us in one of our bigger projects, to Tanganui, and the role that it plays as a partner in that bigger project around rail, road and air freight. So if I could ask you to support this is good, and we'll deal to the dividend question in a moment. Councillor Bellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just did want to comment on this recommendation, particularly that I think I would like to have some clarity as to the risk settings or the risk prudent settings, based, who is assessing those risk policies and their level of prudence, whether whether we use our settings, which we already know about, or whether there are some existing operationally. I'm sure that the airport has some risk management framework in place. Just really keen to know who's assessing that risk and what's the framework for it. And that particularly sticks out to me because in questioning P&AL the few times that they've been here, I am not sure that adverse effects in the future are necessarily being planned for. I think that the terminal redevelopment project could possibly be classified as an adverse development that has required a real shift change in how they're approaching things. But we have seen from COVID, we've seen that other developments can happen really quickly. And I think a lot of this forward program is based on a projection of numbers in one scenario, maybe a few scenarios, but they're all growth scenarios. There's no sort of bringing in disasters that might happen, disruptions that might happen, that might put them further from that goal or make some of the risks that we're taking now a little more sticky. So that feels risky to me. Planning for the future and raising a huge amount of debt from a risk-based scenario, I want to know that all the scenarios are considered, the adverse ones as well as the growth, the positive growth ones. So I think this is being framed as positive and a good economic investment for our future. And I think as part of that, we need to balance that by going, what if things go pear-shaped again? What's the plan? What's the plan then? That's the gap that I see in this statement of expectations. What's our plan B if things don't go to plan? That's all I wanted to say on that. Happy to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Just very quickly, just to respond to Councillor Zabellin, most of the directors that are on the airport board go through the Institute of Directors, so they all have training in this area, so they actually are professional directors. So most of them have been fully trained in this area, so I don't think we need to worry about it too much, but I'll possibly put it back to the chair of that board and let him delve into that area and come back to us.
Okay, councillors, just write a reply. I agree, councillor. Look, we're arm's length. The risk matrix will be dealt with the board, who we employ, and as Councillor Harper has said, I understand just about all of them will be Institute of Directors trained. I know the chair, deputy, or the chair of risk definitely is, and is a former auditor. So I do think they have a really good handle on the risk environment. You are right, it is based on growth, and unashamedly we've got to go there. If we don't, we go backwards, and I think we need to understand that. All right, if we could vote, please. Has passed, 13 votes for, none against. All right. Okay. Could you put it on? Yeah. Councillor Naylor, you've got a additional recommendation to put forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The additional recommendation will probably come up shortly, but it's around the dividend and it is around providing some really specific clarity on our expectations. As you're aware, council did agree a year, that the dividend payment will be progressively reinstated. I think at the time when we said reinstated, our expectations were reinstated to the 40% of net profit after tax, which was what the previous policy was. What's the process since then has been a little bit, at one point it seemed that the airport hadn't picked up on the full intent of that direction, and we had to then come back a second time to make that really clear. And I think what that shows is that we need to be really specific and clear with our expectations, and I understand that now is the time to do that. What I'm proposing, and Councillor Barrett is seconding, is the year one 24-25, that it be no less than 20%. As the office has indicated, 20% is already what they have put in their statement of intent for year one. So the changes would be for year 2 and 3, which is, to say 40 and 40%. Oh, sorry, and it should be no less than 40% net profit after tax in year 2 and year 3. Sorry. Which is essentially the same as what's up there. So what that enables is us giving that intention or expectation to the airport to say, yes, it's 10% this year, then it will be 20% in year 1 of the next 3 years of in terms of the expectations that we're outlining, and then year 2 and 3 would be up to that 40% mark. The new policy that they have introduced, I think we discovered the last time we sat around this table talking about it, didn't provide a lot of certainty to us in terms of what that might look like. There was a lot of ifs and buts. It would depend on this, it would depend on that. And I think what this does is indicates a little bit more clearly what our expectations were in terms of what the minimum should be. And certainly in a year like this year, when they came back with quite a bit more of a positive profit, I don't know how that would work under their policy, but with that fluidity or flexibility, perhaps it could be more. But to say what the bottom line is, that it should be no less than, I think is a good way forward to hopefully work within their new policy, but to give a minimum of what our expectations might be in terms of that progressive reinstatement of the dividend. Acknowledging that there's a lot else on their plate in terms of what they're balancing, this is a planning mechanism. This is us indicating our expectations. Then the statement of intent is their plan. That's not to say that if anything untoward came up that made that seemingly impossible, that there wouldn't be opportunities for conversations about that going forward. But it sets our expectations out at this point as a minimum expectation. And I think this is not too dissimilar to what they've proposed. It's certainly the same as in year 1, but just stepping that up to that original expectation that I think we had for it to be reinstated, which was based on the policy at the time, back up to that 40% net profit after tax.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I've just got a couple of questions. My understanding is currently the dividend, or previously the dividend, was basically a set amount per annum, and of course this changes it to a percentage of net profit. So can I just have that confirmed, please?
I'll just get my officers to confirm that.
Traditionally, going back many years, it was always up 40% of the net profit after tax was the figure, and there wasn't a fixed sum per se that was prescribed, and it's never been a fixed sum. It's always been in relation to the particular profit.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose my reservation around this is really in terms of.
Sorry, are you in comments or?
No, I'm going to pose a question, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor. I suppose my reservation around this is in terms of the airport companies investment commitments or aspirations, how that might be affected by this level of how this might. I just want some comment on that. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair. You put this recommendation up, but the airport company would come back with their ability to be able to do this or not. I guess the risk associated with this is that they aren't able to achieve the dividend for whatever reason, but that'll be brought back through the chamber for further conversations, and whether or not it means that they're unable to achieve things, they may very well be coming back to council to ask for further support and through other mechanisms.
Councillor Hancock, do you want to?
Yeah, no, that last comment was really helpful. Thank you. That's provided some clarity. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to speak briefly on this. I'm sorry I've been ferreting around on my laptop because I've been trying to find the graph that the airport showed to us. I think it was in March, but it doesn't seem to appear in the March papers. They showed us a graph that assumed paying 40% dividend, how they would pay off debt over a 10-year period. Now, what our officer just told us is they've changed that assumption from paying a 40% dividend over the 10 years to paying a 20% dividend over the 10 years, which calls for the need of a recommendation such as this to make it clear that our expectation sits where their budgeting, where their planning had lay. The good thing about this recommendation is it continues the recommendation that we'd made for the last statement of intent. So it'll be 10% for this year, 20% for the year after, and then from there on will be 40%. So this means that if there is a catastrophic reason that they can't pay 40%, they've got a year to make that case to us. So we will review this at the next statement of expectation period. And if for some reason or another there was compelling reason not to go back to this expectation, then we'd be able to consider it at that point. So we're not forcing something on the airport without any chance for them to respond. They'll have a year to come up with a view on this 40%, and hopefully it'll be a reasonably simple year given this is what they initially already showed us and told us they were budgeting for. This is reinforcing what we've already signalled. When we made our last signal, it was that it would be 10%, 20%, and then back to 40% after that. That was explicitly said in this chamber, so this shouldn't come as a bolt out of the blue or a shock to anybody. And just to be clear on the questions around their debt payment, I've said this before and I'll say it again, this is a percentage of their net profit after tax. So let's put a scenario where the airport can't afford to service their debt. Net profit after tax comes after debt servicing. And so if their debt servicing went through the roof, their interest rates went through the roof, something catastrophic happened and they weren't making a profit, well, then we wouldn't get a dividend. Or if they were only making $10,000 profit, well, we'd only get $4,000. So this scales after they have made their debt payment. So this in no way compromises their ability to service their debt and service their program. So just to be really clear, that's why I endorse a percentage view rather than a fixed sum, because I completely agree, I think, with the line Councillor Hancock was going at. A fixed sum would be irresponsible because it wouldn't flex to the situation the airport finds themselves in. But a percentage of net profit after tax is flexible to the system they're working in. So yeah, I think this is a sensible way of going forward. It's not forcing them to pay 40% this year. They've still got this year's 10% and then next year's 20% before this would scale in. So they've got plenty of time if there were some good reason that they couldn't afford this.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to colleagues that have commented already, and would ask the colleagues that are still considering this to please support it. This is simply about being clear with the airport. It is simply about continuing the progressive reinstatement of the dividend as has been signaled before. But there is always, when you're in a situation of communication, let's err on the side of clarity. And that's, if anything, what this does, makes it very clear what our expectation is. We do know that we're in the fortunate position, having signaled this earlier, that the return to profitability for the airport has been actually better than expected, quite a handsome profitability, in fact. And I think we're in a good position to continue to send this signal in a clear way to the airport in terms of how we want to proceed. You know, the debt to revenue ratio that we're fighting in the long-term plan, think about the revenue side of it and think about what this means in terms of that. We want to make sure that where we have reasonable access to non-rates revenue, are building that into our planning assumptions so that we have the ability to best deliver towards the community's aspirations for the long-term plan. And this is in some small way supporting that. So would ask for your support in that regard.
Before I go back to you, Councillor Naylor, write a reply. Look, I'm okay to support this. I think it does give some clarity. It is the grenade that gets chucked into this chamber many times about the dividend. And I think it is generous enough to enable them to still operate, although it's going to be tight because your 40%, although it is after tax, has seen other airports come to their councils which are doing rebuilds as they will be doing around their campus, and theirs is a lot larger than our other regional neighbours. So, but it does give some clarity, and that has been the thing that has been lacking a little bit, and I'm surprised that it wasn't probably it wasn't a little bit stronger in the original draft statement of intent. But anyway, I think it's okay to signal this to them. I don't think it'll be a huge surprise either. Back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have too much more to add other than just to point out this is actually an incredibly small return on the asset. When I think they said the 10% was only going to be 190,000. So even based on those numbers, we're talking about less than $1 million. And I think we owe it to our community to advocate on their behalf to at least get some sort of financial return for the asset, which is their asset. Yeah.
All right, we will vote. Okay, that's passed. 13 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we'll just move through to the other Palmerston North Airport, number 13, which is around instructions just relating to the annual meeting. Steve, over to you. Page 83 of your papers.
Yes, elected members, normally these resolutions would be part of what you would have considered at the last meeting when you considered the annual report, but there was a little bit of uncertainty at the time about the issue of directors' fees, and you've now debated that and come to a conclusion about that. So these are just formal resolutions to embrace the position and to have those considered at the meeting in writing that will occur in the next day or two.
There are no questions. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so we've got the recommendations there that council receive the notice of the 23 annual meeting of the airport company, that council instruct myself as the mayor, as council shareholder representative, to support the proposed resolutions to be considered at the annual meeting of the Palmerston North Airport Limited, to be conducted by way of resolution on writing. Been moved by the Deputy Mayor. Can second. Thank you, Councillor Dennison. The no comment. We will vote, please. And that is passed. 12 votes for and 1 abstention. Look, we're going to look to try and adjourn for lunch at 1. So we'll jump to, and I'll vacate the chair and just we'll jump to number 15, which is around international travel, and I'll vacate the chair and allow the Deputy Mayor to jump in.
Kia ora, everyone. Thank you, Gabrielle. I'm going to hand it over to you now to present your report. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou councillors. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Kunan Chonka, our international relations and education advisor, replacing Kate Harridge for her 6 months replacement. It is noted that this 6 months period is the most busiest time of our team. So really appreciate Kunan coming to the team. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge regarding the report, I would like to acknowledge and thank our senior urban designer, Dave Charnley, for his expertise in Sponge City vision and design and his support and contribution to the report. Secondly, just to reiterate, the key themes of the proposed delegation visit are centered around international education and environmental management. It is also important to note that international education is a significant contributor to the region's economy. Pre-COVID, it was estimated to be worth over $130 million and supported 1,400 jobs. And in Manawatu and Whanganui, the average economic value per student per year is estimated at $39,290 by Education New Zealand. And this is not counting other potential benefits, such as the value generated by international students who settle in New Zealand as skilled migrants after graduation, and also the long-term benefits of international students to New Zealand after they graduate and return to their home countries, driving up trade and tourism for New Zealand. And last but not least, regarding environmental management, nature-based solutions like sponge cities are very cost-effective and resilient approaches to environmental challenges that we are all very familiar with these days. They deliver multiple environmental and community benefits. We are very fortunate to have city partners like Mihara and Kunshan who are very advanced in this area. We would be very lucky to learn from their best practices in terms of planning, policy, and implementation. And I believe that we would get much more bang for our bucks in working with our partners and investing in nature-based solutions in the long run. So with that, I will take the report as read and happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And at this moment in time, I'm going to open it up if any councillors. Oh, I do see that we have someone who's got a question. Councillor Naylor, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report. Just looking at the delegation that's outlined on the top of page 96, the Mayor and the Mayoress, it says infrastructure services staff. Is that one staff member or more?
I believe at the moment the intention is to have a maximum of 2 staff from infrastructure. However, because this is not my expertise, I believe that infrastructure team will send their most appropriate personnel to join us on the trip.
So we're talking about a delegation of perhaps up to 5 people then?
From PNCC, yes, correct.
And so what would be the costs of the Mayor and Mayoress are outlined here, but what would be the overall cost of the full delegation to council for this trip?
So the infrastructure services staff, should they come join us on this delegation visit, the cost of that won't be coming out from the international budget. We only have enough, just enough really to cover for the mayor, the mayoress, and myself. The mayoress cost, as indicated, would be up to $5,000, And that also because the accommodation cost and meals, etc., sometimes can be shared with the mayor. And then you would add another approximately $10,000 for myself to join the trip.
So, assuming that the infrastructure services staff would still be paid for by council, would we assume that those might be another 10,000 each then?
Possibly, yes.
Okay, so all up 58, up to 58,000?
I can only give you the approximation, as you know, because the trip is not confirmed yet. So all
Okay.
of our bookings and everything, it's not secure for
Okay.
for courts.
Thank you. Just my other questions related to the economic benefit of the sister cities, and you mentioned the economic benefit of an international student being in the city. Have we had students come from any of our sister cities to Palmerston North to study in the recent
I believe
years?
we have. Now,
how many?
I wouldn't have that information in hand. However, we did have we did host a group from IPU that came from that had a couple of students in that group from Mihara. Kunshan, while I can't tell you on top of my head whether we have students from Kunshan studying in our city, but we did send our student Krista to Kunshan, and that was worth $300,000 of scholarship for her to study there.
Okay, thank you. I'm just interested in trying to understand the tangible benefits of the investment that we make into sister cities, including this delegation. Are you able to outline
Excuse me, councillor. Just want to say, I think we're deviating from what the actual kaupapa is, which is approval for international travel for the mayor.
It
So
relates
is it going to be
it relates to the return on investment and further contributing money to build those relationships. It is definitely very much connected to this paper. It's my final question, Madam Chair.
Ka pai. I would just state that I think that's a debate for the long-term plan. However, I'll let you go ahead with this question.
Thank you.
And knowing it's your last one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the paper does describe, there's obviously some interest, some shared interest in terms of the sister cities. Are there any tangible benefits other than those few students that have come to the city ratepayers in terms of our sister city relationship?
I think it is quite evident the benefits that international relations and education bring benefits to our community in many ways. If you're talking about trade and business, we bring in the EU business delegation last year. Recently, we brought in the UK High Commission to talk about the free trade agreement to our business community. 65 businesses attended and I'm sure benefited from that event alone. In terms of education, we have supported many partnerships for our institution and schools in the city. We have got recently MOU signed on education collaboration supported by PNCC. In terms of arts and culture, that is even more evident in the mural arts on on the wall and everything else. So yes, I think it's relatively tangible to look at the international relations and education benefits to the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Just before we move on to Councillor Hancock, I just want to seek clarification, and I'm going to ask the CE with regards to this. If infrastructure staff were going to go on this, is there a dedicated budget line for them to use internally?
Yes, I mean, each of the activities, there is travel and accommodation budgets available for them to use.
So already budgeted for. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Gabriel.
Oh, sorry.
I started talking when you,
Sorry,
I saw you press
thank
the button. Thanks, Gabriel. Just a very quick question. Cedar Rangatani, they've been invited, and expression of interest from GHD and Stantec. Have we got an update on those, on the progress on that at all?
So I haven't gone ahead with further confirmation from the interested parties because I would like to be able to come back to them and say, yes, the delegation is going ahead, and seek further confirmation from them. It is a rather a chicken and egg kind of situation here. I wouldn't be able to confirm until we are confirmed.
Okay, thanks, Gabriel. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Gabriella. To follow up, in that 1.3, you said you sent messages out, and I get that it's a chicken and egg situation, but was there any interest from education partners?
Unfortunately for this term, because of the timing, which works well for council due to the long-term work planning for the new year, it is not a very attractive time for our education providers to join us. However, I have their full confidence and their delegation of task to represent them in visiting their partners in those cities, and also on their behalf talk to different schools.
Okay, and also with the Rangitane, A, is there any interest from them? And B, noting it says attendance on the trip would need to be self-funded, but if we refer back to, sorry, Roland, I'm going to talk about you now. Refer back to the mayor's trip to Missoula, when Rangitane couldn't attend themselves, they suggested that we sent a member and then we funded that. So is that likely to be part of this discussion?
We definitely value the partnership with Rangitane, and it has been a really beneficial, mutually beneficial partnership for us. However, because of the budget constraint, we have invited them but unable to fund at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Gabriel, are you able to tell me just how big the international travel budget is as part of your international relations?
Are you asking about this current financial year?
That would be good.
So the total operational budget for international relations and education is top of my head is about $85,000. So there are quite a lot for us to do, as you can see. So we've budgeted about $40,000 for traveling throughout the year.
And does that just cover your team's travel, or does that include the mayor's travel as well?
We also cover the mayor and the mayor's travel.
Thank you. And I do have another question, but I think it's more likely to be a governance question through you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Which is about the second recommendation there that says council note that should the mayoress accompany, whereas my reading of the elected members' expense policy says that for the mayoress to travel, prior approval of council is required. So not simply a matter of noting, but proactively approving the mayoress to travel.
Yes, we have a motion to come that would cover that. So thank you.
Is it possible to have the question answered? That do we note it, or does it need to be approved?
This is I'll just take counsel on this. We're just checking the policy and get back to you. Thank you. Just while we're waiting for that, I'll go to Chris Dryberg, our Chief of Infrastructure, would like to make a comment. Thank you, Chris.
Sure, thanks for that. Through you, Madam Chair, just clarifying the question about the GHD and Stantec. So I've been in contact with them several times, and they're very keen to go. They think that the Sponge City, the opportunity to go and look at the Sponge City and see some of the innovation that's happening over there would be very valuable. So I feel pretty confident that if we confirm the trip, that they will both send people.
Kia ora, thank you for that. And we'll move on to, we're coming back, Councillor Bowen, but we'll go to Councillor Zebulon for her question. Thank you.
Ngā mihi, Madam Chair. Ngā mihi, Gabrielle. A similar line of questioning to Councillor Bowen. I've been in the expenses policy and also did a direct compare with the similar report that we had last year when the Mayor was travelling over to the US and to the Netherlands. And just something that I noticed was that in that previous request last year, flights were not included, although they are permissible by the policy, flights were not included for the Mayoress, and the amount sought was $1,000 excluding flights to cover the costs, accommodation and meals and things. And I was just wondering what's different about this trip in terms of the Mayoress travelling and duties she might undertake that would, what's the point of difference for the increased sum and the inclusion of flights for this trip? Could you speak to that a little?
David, did you want to?
Through you, Madam Chair, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. My recollection was the council resolved at that meeting to cover the flights for the Mayoress, which I think was separate to the recommendation that was originally put.
I'll just have to challenge that because I've checked the recommendation and there's definitely flights are mentioned in that memo from the 14th of December last year, and that's are not mentioned in that memo, but they are mentioned in this memo.
Yeah. So just to clarify, the original report and recommendation went up was not to cover the Mayoress cost. However, council put through a resolution and that passed for us to cover for the Mayoress cost up to $5,000. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zebulon. And now I'm going to ask our Democracy and Governance Manager if she would please respond directly to your question, Councillor Bowen. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Bowen. I did review these and you're correct. I haven't been accurate enough. So the difference is that the Mayoress could choose to accompany the Mayor without Council's approval. Should it be on Council's books that Council pays for it, Council would need to agree that. And so I would recommend that we rephrase this to say something along the lines of that Council agree that the Mayoress that the Mayoress accompany the Mayor, and hang on, how can we say that Council agree that the Mayoress accompany the Mayor and the expenses be, or in order that the expenses be covered is what we've got two parts here that we need to cover off. So you were correct.
Councillor Bowen, any further question to that?
Thanks.
The assumption of the policy is that should Council agree for the Mayoress to be covered, that all the costs would be covered. That's how the policy is written.
Yes.
So by approving her accompanying the Mayor in a business capacity, you are agreeing that you will cover the expenses.
Yes.
One and the same.
I think that to clarify the point you made, what I'm understanding from that is that the Mayoress does not need our permission to travel.
Exactly.
We have to give approval for the associated travel, accommodation and incidental costs.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Councillor Bowen. A question from Councillor Fitzgerald. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarity to Chief Infrastructure Officer Chris. Is it council infrastructure staff that will be travelling or external consultants that will be travelling?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so both. So the Stantec and GHD, they're the two sort of companies that are most directly providing services to the council relative to stormwater. GHD do a lot of design work for us. Stantec are obviously doing the work on the nature calls and investigating, alternative options, and I think, what do you call it? Adaptive management plans, I think is the term I'm searching for. But we're also suggesting that Mike Monaghan and myself would join the delegation as well.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Councillor Naylor.
Governance may be changing it already, I'm not sure, but I was just going to suggest that we shouldn't agree a decision about whether the mayoress goes or not. I think that's her decision. I think we should say, should the mayoress accompany the mayor, that the expenses would be covered in line with it. I'm presuming that's what you're trying to do, is it? So agree that should, I'll let them do the wording as long as that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes. Are there any further questions? Right. Myself and also Councillor Habita are prepared to move the motions that the council grant approval for the mayor to lead a small delegation. Okay, I'll just have a pause. Thank you. Councillor Naylor, have you got another question there? Okay, thank you. Kia ora, everyone. I think we've got this sorted now. The recommendation for council, or the motion, is that the council grant approval for the mayor to lead a small delegation to visit our partners in China and Japan from the 20th of January to the 6th of February 2024 in commemoration of the city's sister city anniversaries with Quinshan and Mihara. And number 2, that the council note that should the mayoress accompany the mayor and the council approve the expenses of the mayoress for flights, meals, accommodation and incidentals will be covered by the council according to the council's elected and appointed members. Expenses and allowances policy 2022, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Leonie Hapeta. I want to talk to this. As we know, with regards to international travel and taking a delegation from Palmerston North City Council, there are opportunities that have been outlined in the report that we have from the International Relations Manager. But it's an opportunity to promote a stronger connection, to actively seek opportunities for our educational community, businesses and trade. We already have companies that have expressed an interest, their interest in attending the delegation. We know that from a educational perspective within our wider educational community of Palmerston North, pre-COVID, we had 3,000 plus international students here in Palmerston North. And that's gaining traction again, thankfully. We currently have about 1,300 international students, and that's bringing in somewhere in the vicinity within our community of $50 million, if I'm not mistaken, I was advised of. And we also know that the environmental management, the infrastructure team would be looking at that there are opportunities that far surpass what we had expected and would want to achieve. The other thing is that I think that with all those who go overseas on behalf of Palmerston North City Council, they're ambassadors, they're advocates, they're constantly looking for opportunities. And as we know in the past, we haven't received that kind of support from central government with regards to funding opportunities. So we've got to make our own opportunities in many regards. And we know that education has been, well, Palmerston North has been known as a knowledge city. And there are other places that have caught on to that, and they too are chasing those. But this sister city experience for us has been a positive one with all our sister cities. But in order to enhance those relationships, we actually have to have a kanohi ki te kanohi exchange. And who better to do that in terms of like leading that would be the mayor and the delegation that go with him. So I'm very fully in support of this, and now happy to open it up for comment. And I have Councillor Finlay. Thank you.
Actually, a very quick question, if I may ask. Because the council is spending so much money and sending so many people over to China, will there be an in-depth report to council on what benefits there were from the trip after the trip?
Yes, from my understanding, that's already been identified within the International Managers Report and documented in there. Yes, as there was previously as well, as there always has been. Sorry. And it will go, firstly be tabled to the Economic Growth Committee as well, prior to coming out. Thank you. Is that all, Councillor Finlay? Thank you. Councillor Naylor. Kia ora. Sorry.
Thank you. Probably no surprise to anyone around this table. If nothing else, I am consistent. I won't be supporting this. I have read many international engagement reports and reports after delegations have gone. I've still failed to see any tangible benefit to our ratepayers of the engagement. Interesting interactions, yes. You know, some interesting connections. All of that stuff takes quite a lot of resource. And yes, of course, if we're going to build relationship, doing it face to face is better. But I fail to see the return on investment. The 50 million that's been talked about is about international students in our city. That's not as a result of our sister city relationships. In fact, we've heard that there's only perhaps very few students that have come as a direct result of the sister city relationships. So at a time where next week we're going to have to be prioritising some things that are of huge value to our ratepayers, around $50,000 for a delegation, whilst I acknowledge there are already budgets in this year's budget that may accommodate those, the reason that these sort of decisions come to council is because we have to weigh up in the current environment at this time. Is this something that we are prepared to say yes on behalf of our ratepayers to pay? Any budget in this year's budget that doesn't get spent can help our future conversations. So for that reason, I'm not going to be supporting both of these recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. I'd just like to raise the fact that Palmerston North Boys High School, Palmerston North Girls High School, Freiburg High School, Awatapu High School, they all have had international students historically and currently. And only last week, where I lived in my neighbourhood, I got a brochure from Awatapu Primary School, Secondary School, asking if anyone was wanting to host those students, because they desperately need people to host those international students, and they're prepared to pay $300 per week per student. We have long-term, medium-term and short-term as well. And I know that myself, I've gone to at least three international student events to support and acknowledge their arrival, because those students have been brought through the Palmerston North City Council. Gabriel, just give me a nod if that's correct in terms of that. Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
Can I just ask the relevance of your comments to the sister city relationships that the paper is about? Because you're talking about international students, but this paper is about sister city relationship.
In part, those international students were brought here because of the international cities relationship. That's in part from my knowledge. But anyway, we'll leave that there. Thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor, for your comments. I just want to endorse this recommendation, and it's primarily around one is around the environmental part of this trip, and I think it's the first time I've ever heard it mentioned in a chamber that we're actually going overseas to actually do a trip about getting a mutual understanding about opportunities where we can actually get more understanding about water, transportation, flood, earthquake prevention, and get a response about that. I've never actually heard anyone going overseas to actually look at other countries and talk about the way in which other countries do things, and we learn from that and bring it back into our chamber. And I think that's very good to be able to do that, learn from countries like Japan and China who do these things very, very well, and bring those learnings back here so that we can actually learn from it and do it better here. The second thing I wanted to say, and I think the Deputy Mayor stole my thunder, we do a lot of international education, and the connections we can make is the most important thing. Opening the door for us for international education is so important. That's all it's about. It's just opening that door. And that's all we want to do, is having people go over and open the door so that we can actually get people back here and have that here. So I just hope that we support that going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Harpiter. Councillor Zebulon, thank you.
Ngā mihi, Madam Chair. I'm just going to stand to completely tautoko Councillor Naylor's comments. I find myself completely in alignment with them, so I respectfully will not support this, and I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about it. I think where it comes down to for me is that I think we lack context in terms of the overall program. So I'm sure that there is a program of forward planning for these visits, but we don't really see them. So they come into the chamber what appears to be quite ad hoc, and we make those decisions in the absence of budgetary information or the overall program of how many visits we're going to be sending, which ones are sister cities, which ones are planned in advance, and which ones are invitations on the fly that require a really responsive, quick turnaround from us. So I do find it quite difficult to consider these kinds of recommendations in the absence of the whole picture of what are we actually driving at with our whole international relations program, and where does this trip fit into that. So I do find that I think I do disagree actually, that I don't think it is quite evident that the benefits of this program are there. I think there's a difference between reporting on the activity and then measuring the success of the activity or the impact of that activity, and that's some of the information that I'd really like to see to help me weigh up these kinds of decisions. So in the absence of that kind of information, I find it's difficult to support because the importance of it is not convincing to me the way it's presented. And the other aspect that I just wanted to remind councillors of was the Smart Cities conference in Taipei that happened recently, that our mayor presented what we're doing in our city as Sponge City innovations, and our chief planning officer and our climate change analyst did attend that also and got a lot of amazing information about what other groups or what other countries are doing to respond to Sponge City issues or climate change issues. And Wageningen as well had a strong focus on that. So I think we have made inroads there. There's definitely good learnings, but until I have some kind of context of where this sits in the whole program, it's really hard for me to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bowen. Kia ora.
Good, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I found myself in agreement with the comments just made by Councillor Zabelin. But unlike Councillor Naylor, I have been anything but consistent on this issue, because I think sometimes there are good reasons for these kind of trips, and sometimes there aren't. I think my concern, as very well articulated, is that we don't have line of sight to that, that the planning, which I'm sure happens in this space, is invisible to us in this chamber. And I note, following the last overseas delegation, an offline conversation which suggested that we should have that conversation ourselves to know what's coming, why it's coming, so that we've got an opportunity to get ahead of this. And that hasn't happened, and that leaves me very disappointed, because I totally agree that I can't see the outcomes that are coming through from these trips. Absolutely support what Councillor Harper said, that there is value in them. The value is not the question. The outcomes for me are the question. What do we get from this? And to be given examples of the $300,000 scholarship that took somebody out of New Zealand to live in China, I don't think is a benefit that our community is experiencing. So that just doesn't stack up for me. And I also find it a little, I'm going to say, ironic that we laud the benefit of understanding the overseas experience, when in my term on this council, there have been regularly officer reports which have referenced overseas experience, and we have been pushed back at that from members around this table to say, well, that wouldn't work here because Palmerston North is different or New Zealand is different. So we seem to be willing to go and find out what happens overseas, but we're not very willing to apply it. And again, that speaks to the value proposition, to the value of the outcomes that we're getting from these trips. So for that reason, I won't be supporting the recommendations. And I'm also going to ask for the recommendations to be separated, please, because I'm also not supporting the second recommendation. I'm really happy for the mayoress to travel with the mayor if she wants to do that. But I don't see that as being for a business purpose, which is why I was making sure that wasn't going in there. That's a different part of our policy. I think we've moved on a long way in business terms. If I travel for my job, I don't expect my husband to come with me. I don't need supervision or my hand holding. And we're a long way from buy one, get one free. So if the mayoress is travelling, then that's for the mayoress to decide. And I don't think our ratepayers should be paying for that. So I can't make that decision. That's for her to decide. But what we can decide is that we're not covering the expenses. So I won't be supporting either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just going to comment briefly. Look, we're actually talking about funding for this year, and we already know that there's actually money in the budget for to actually fund this. And there are benefits and there are learnings to be had by these trips to our sister cities. And I acknowledge, the comments made by Councillor Bowen and others in terms of, sometimes I think the reporting back to council could be a lot better. But this is actually more about not only just the relationships with our sister cities, but in this case, we've actually got an opportunity to build some good relationships with GHD and Stantec, particularly around sponge cities. We don't live in a borough. We live in a global world. So we have to have connections. And I suppose Councillor Naylor's comments, I think probably, I understand fully what Councillor Naylor is talking about in terms of the sustainability of this particular line item in our program. But that's a conversation for another day, not today. So those are my comments. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was a bit the same lines around the future relationships of international travel as a line item that will be debated, in my view, in the long-term plan. But currently we've got a commitment with budget provision of to a degree, and a commitment around our relationships internationally with sister city. I was fortunate last month, as you know, to be at our sister city, and the value that they place on our relationship is high. I met with the deputy mayor with support of translation, and the chair of their council, and a tour of City Hall and key stakeholders in their city, with anticipation of a possible visit in the new year to celebrate their anniversary. So I do want to give a viewpoint that is anticipated. As far as students from the city exchanging back and forth, I was hosted at IPU from a student that had graduated from here, from Palmerston North IPU, and hosted a tour around and visits to key tutors, and met 3 students from IPU Palmerston North that are there for 6 months, Kayla, Eva, and Mikolai. And they're there studying for the 6 months with the opportunity to bring back other students back in country. They are ambassadors for our city. That's just a little snippet of an IPU example. Highgar, which is another new university, they've invested heavily in education and have a global perspective like we don't think of here, around called the Hiroshima Global Academy, with their own domestic students, sure, but actually have got scholarships for students abroad. And I met Sophie and Zach from Auckland and Christchurch, from New Zealand, there at that institute, and they've offered scholarships for our own students in Palmerston North to take up the next cycle of intake. And that's a relationship that's developed through our international city coordinators, Mihara City itself, and the Hiroshima Prefectural Board of Education. So they're significant initiatives to develop exchange. And so my short insight into the sister city relationship and seeing their engagement there and their investment in it themselves, I have no qualms of supporting this visit, and I'll support both recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fitzgerald, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like my colleague Councillor Dennison, you all heard my report from my trip overseas this year. But I do agree with a lot of the comments, particularly that what I'm excited about is to hear from the Chief Infrastructure Officers that 2 of our partners are keen to travel with us, and in terms of tangible, giving something back to the city, understanding what sponge cities look like overseas is hugely valuable to our city, to our council, and to what the future looks like and how we manage perhaps our waters. I do also agree with colleagues
that they cannot see the benefit of overseas travel with the council. And my take on that blurred line of sight is that if the council are putting $1 into international travel, but you're expecting $1.50 to come back into the account, you're always going to be consistently upset when these recommendations come to the table, because you don't see the value that Councillor Dennison just spoke of, the 3 students that he met over there. There's lots and lots of different benefits, and it's not just about the money, but that's what we're here for as well, to think about the money. So I don't disagree with those sentiments. What I would like to put to my councillor colleagues is, every time this comes up, we have the same discussion in the chamber. Why don't we take it out of the chamber, sit down with a cup of coffee and just have a chat to each other? And the reason why I'm suggesting that is so that we can give some direction to our officers. The next time a recommendation comes to the Chamber for international travel, these are some of the expectations that sit with us as elected members. Otherwise, next time it happens, we're going to be saying exactly the same thing, holding our own positions, valid or not, whereas we could probably do something about it going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I completely agree with Councillor Fitzgerald's previous comments that we don't want to waste time having the same conversation every time. I just want to make 2 points that haven't been made before, so I thought could be worth throwing in briefly. One is around international travel and international perspective. I'd push back a little bit on the idea that we have a very insular view. I can count 7, 8, 9, 10 of us who are councillors who've been overseas within the last 12 months, if not even the last 6 months. So we are a well-travelled council. We do have a well-travelled perspective, and yes, there is value in sending officers as well, but I would push back against the idea that the only way we can get international perspective is sending the mayor overseas. The other thing I'd say is, look, I will vote for this today, but I'm not long-term going to buy the argument that we have international students here because we have an international program at council, unless there are some numbers to back it up. You know, we say that we've got these students coming to Awatapu or Freiburg or coming to Massey or IPU. I imagine international students get a survey as a part of their experience coming to New Zealand. I would love for there to be a question saying, what made you choose to come study here? If that data already exists, please bring it to us in the report. But, you know, when we fund an event, we say, well, we expect 20,000 people to come to the city as a result of that event, and they're going to spend this amount of money, and that's the return we're going to get. Well, if the argument for funding international travel is that we're going to get students to come to the country, then I would like to see an expectation of how many students are going to be inspired to come to New Zealand because of this visit, if that's going to be used as an argument for it. If that's not a figure that we can give, then don't use it as an argument for the program. Put an argument more along the lines of what Councillor Dennison said, of the more non-hard benefits of a program like this. But I don't think we can just say there's $50 million for international students, they're coming to the city, therefore that's a result of these trips, because I don't think that stacks up. So if there's data, please bring it to us. If there's not data, please don't use that as a reason to justify the trip. But look, I will support this today. Perhaps not item 2, but I will support item 1 for the mayor to visit. I respect the values that have been shared, particularly by Councillor Harper, around the benefit of this specific kaupapa, the specific learning that we're going over, particularly as we come into a stage we're making some serious decisions around how we fund stormwater long term, particularly given it looks like this will be a part of Council's remit for the long term. When we're making these real decisions, it would be good for our infrastructure team to have an understanding and appreciation of the ways that we might be able to do this differently. And is there a unique way of getting that appreciation by going overseas to this specific conference? Probably. So I accept the value that this trip may bring.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Just prior to us going to vote on the matter, thank you everyone for your comments. Everyone has valid comments. I picked up some of the things that we do have a prior commitment to our sister cities. We have a dedicated budget line for international travel and relationships and interaction. I picked up what Councillor Hancock mentioned about global citizenship and our part or our commitment to being involved in global citizenship. Also, I think you had a valid point, Councillor Wood, about the data, and that's something for us to perhaps pick up there. So thank you, everyone. We're about to go to, we've had our discussion, so we'll go to the vote. Oh, thank you. We'll go to vote 1, then 2, and then we've got an additional recommendation. Thank you. So with regards to 1, I won't read 1 and 2 out again, but we'll vote on number 1. Thank you. Number 1 has passed. Thank you. And now to vote on number 2 very shortly. Now number 2, thank you. And that too has passed. Thank you very much. 7 for, 5 against and 1 abstention. And now the third recommendation will come up very shortly, that Councillor Bowen will talk to. She'll talk to Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for noting that, Councillor Dennison. And the next motion is that the Chief Executive provide an annual plan for international relations activity to Council, moved by Councillor Bowen and seconded by Councillor Naylor, I suspect. Oh, sorry, Zevlin. Kia ora. Over to you. Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you for that, Deputy Chair. This was just to follow up the comments that both Councillors Bell and I made about wishing we had an advance view of what's coming through the international relations plan, noting in Councillor Dennison's comments that when he travelled this year, he said he was aware of this trip that was coming in January, but that was not an awareness that I shared. So clearly there is information. It would be helpful to have that in advance to inform these discussions and save us going round the houses every time. So I'd be grateful if we could look to support that. Thank you.
Over to our CE for comment. Thank
Yes,
you.
through the chair. Understand what you're trying to achieve here. Also made some notes as I went as well, whether or not there's a wider, I'll check with Mr. Murphy as well about a wider workshop about international relations activities and what that's about. So I'm hearing a few comments about that. That might be useful to do some more work around that with elected members as well. Just in relation to this particular recommendation, providing an annual plan of international relations activity might be difficult on occasions because it does depend on when the invitations come in. So we just need to, it might be sort of a rolling annual plan associated with the activities, so you can kind of get a bit of a view, and whether that comes back as part of a quarterly report update or something along those lines about what the next 12 months might actually look like, might be useful. But I know that Gabrielle and her team do, around the globe at particular points in time.
Thank you for that, Wade, really helpful, and absolutely recognise there's a proactive element to this and a reactive element, and however we can report that to capture it would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you to our CE and also Councillor Bowen. And now if we're ready to vote on that the Chief Executive provide an annual plan for international relations activity to Council. That has passed unanimously. Thank you very much. To everyone, we're going to have a break for lunch. I think you've earned a good lunch break, and we'll be back in the hour. Thank you.